Shalom and welcome to the One Pasuk podcast, where the rabbis at Congregation Avas Torah each share an insight on one particular pasuk from the Parsha and reflect on each other's ideas. Rabbinic banter, I like to call it. I am Chaim Pupko, and I am joined by my dear friends and teammates, Rabbi Daniel Goldberg.
Shalom.
And Rabbi Morty Jesus.
Shalom.
All right, here we go. Our one pasuk for this week, Parshas Achrei and Kedoshim, comes from the latter of the two parshios, Perek Yud Tes, pasuk Yud Ches, chapter 19, verse 18. You know it, you love it. Lo sikom v'lo sitoras b'nei amecha. You shall not take vengeance nor bear a grudge against b'nei amecha, your fellows. V'yahavta l'recha kamocha ani Hashem. Love thy neighbor as thyself. I am God. One of the most famous verses in the Torah, at least the second half, V'yahavta l'recha kamocha, so famous, as I often mention, that in some polls taken in America, some people believe that not only is this one of the Ten Commandments, but is the first of the Ten Commandments. But it is not. It is relegated here amongst a group of mitzvos that begin Parshas Kedoshim. Who's kicking us off today?
There's a general understanding that's important that we apply to the concepts of taking revenge, lo tikom v'lo titod. Because if you think about it, why is it so bad? Somebody did something to me. Okay, nikama maybe is a little bit more extreme, outright revenge. But let's say somebody says, can I borrow your car? And they say no. And then a week later they ask me, hey, can I borrow your car? And you say no, because you say yes, but I'm not going to be like you. What's the big deal? You want to remind the guy that, hey, you didn't exactly do me well, but I'm not like you.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but that's such a great question. I never thought of it. How is revenge any different than midah keneged midah?
Oh, I was just going to get there.
Measure for measure.
Generally, that's what we apply. The standard that we apply is midah keneged midah. You treat me like this, I'll treat you back like that. But the Torah inherently is telling us something here that is far more complicated, and it's not what meets the eye. It's not just a midah keneged midah application that we're questioning. There's something here that does not allow us to behave this way, and we have to ask ourselves why. Why not? I feel entitled to that. You did this to me, I want to do it back to you. Or at a minimum, I want to remind you that I'm not going to do it back to you, but you did it to me, and don't ever forget that. And so I saw in the Bet HaLevi on Bitachon, he speaks extensively about the concepts of Bitachon. And one element he points to is this very command. And he says that automatically, by me saying I'm going to take revenge, or I'm going to remind you of the way that you acted towards me, we're failing to recognize that it was God that did this to us. This person is merely a stick in the hands of God. And so Hashem was the one who didn't want us to have the car that day. We're viewing this individual as the impediment to the car that I needed. But rather, what's really taking place is Hashem is the one that said no. And so if we blame somebody else, if we take out revenge on somebody else, if we point a finger at somebody else and say, you're the reason why, we neglect to realize that it is truly God that brought this about. And therefore, the reason why the Torah prohibits, even though maybe on the surface, this very much appears to be a midah keneged midah style reaction, but it fails to recognize God's role in this, and that this individual is merely a stick, but in the hands of God, and for that reason, the Torah prohibits this.
That's really interesting. It actually gives me another way to look at how we ascribe things to God. We often say when something bad happens, oh, Hashem's punishing me, or when something good happens, oh, Baruch Hashem, thank you for bringing me this. But this is a whole different reason to ascribe something to Hashem, and that is in order to maintain relationships with the people around us. Right? When they do something to us, by pinning it on Hashem, it's an expression of bitachon, but it's also a way of using Hashem to take the heat off of our relationship.
It's that much harder when we mix in an individual. It's like, no, that guy wronged me.
Yeah.
That guy did this. That guy did that. No, in reality, it was supposed to happen. Now, of course, Hashem has a separate calculation. If somebody does you wrong, he's going to pay his price, and he's not just going to say, what do you mean I was a stick in the hand of God? Which is a theological conversation in and of itself. But as it relates to this, when we see a person in our path versus, nature, then it's that much harder for us to remind ourselves that it is God playing that role.
And it's almost like you have to live your life thinking about the ledger not the ledger that you share with your neighbor, but it's always the ledger with God. Meaning you're not tallying up, neighbor did this, I do this. It's always something happens to me and it's my ledger with God. And then I have an opportunity to do something kind, and that's really my ledger with God. It's not me and my neighbor. It's just like a different way to see things.
Yeah,
it's very profound. I actually was drawn to the exact same question in this pasuk of how it hangs together. Lo sikom v'lo titor, the idea of not taking vengeance and kind of not holding a grudge. And then the dramatically polar opposite, which is v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, to love your neighbor like yourself, which is such an enormously demanding mandate. It's reinterpreted, right, by Rabbi Akiva when he says this over. He doesn't say, do unto your neighbor as you would want them to do to you, to love your neighbor like yourself, but rather, my disani Allah, what is hated to you, don't do to your neighbor, right? It's a much smaller mandate. So this is like the most ambitious kind of mandate in the Torah of loving your neighbor like yourself, and it's wedded with lo sikom v'lo sitor. How does that don't take vengeance? That's would seemingly be a pretty low bar, but it's actually, the answer is actually takes me to what you already teed up for us here, Rabbi Kesus, which is that when it comes to lo sikom v'lo sitor, you are actually in the right. You have a right to treat someone the way they treated you, right? Like the strict, just thing in that moment is to treat someone the way they treated you. You're not stealing from someone. You're not doing something bad. You're seemingly just repaying what was done to you. And so, in order to ask us not to do that, in order to tell us you can't take revenge on your neighbor, so that can only be justified or understood in the context of v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. This is what the Shadal says. The Shadal of Shlomo David Lutzato. He says, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, when you love someone, so then ava mikalkelas es ashura. Ava allows you to rise above the strict letter of the law and justice. And if you love your neighbor, then you're not going to want to be petty with them. You're not going to want to exact justice and, your pound of flesh. If there's love, then there's forgiveness. There's not smallness and pettiness. There's a graciousness that is there. And I think it also relates to the Mishnah in Avos that talks about, if you say shali, shali, and shelcha, shelcha, what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours. So the first manda amar in the Mishnah says that's beinunus, that's neutral, that's fine. Right? It's not as bad as saying what's mine is mine, what's yours is mine. Obviously that's bad, but if what's mine is mine, what's yours is yours, that would be neutral. But then the Mishnah presents us with the alternative, which is that that's midas stom. That's this excessively petty way to be in this world. And the reason is because you need chesed, you need kindness, you need love. You can't just be exact and holding the line. And, we need that graciousness and that love in order to have a functional society where we care for each other and where we forgive, even when we're in the right, to hold a grudge and to be upset and to want to seek revenge.
So it's so interesting because when I chose this pasuk, I thought, oh yeah, of course, we're all going to talk about v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, just skip right over the first part and go to the second part. But both of you guys spoke about the first part, so that's great because I'm going to speak about more exclusively the second part, v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love thy neighbor as thyself, which we say it with thy because it's such a familiar phrase. There is a familiar question that's asked on this, and that is this really possible? Can you really love someone else to the extent that you love yourself? Just naturally, the way we're created, we prioritize ourselves, right? We care for ourselves because that's ourselves. We feel that. And there's a well-known answer that v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, it could have just said v'ahavta l'reacha, that you should love your neighbor. That would have been understandable. Okay, we have to love our neighbor. But it says kamocha because that comes to teach us that you have to love yourself in order to love others, that you have to have a certain sense of self in order to love others. If a person has a low opinion of themselves, they may justify that and say, okay, I can treat another person the same way. But no, it's a call on both of us that I have to love myself and I have to stand on my own 2 feet so that I can then share or treat the other person in the same way. It's kind of the same lesson that I spoke about last week in terms of the importance of self-esteem from a sense of confidence and a sense of strength. But I think this goes a little further, actually, because I think it's teaching us that in our relationships, we know that people that we're close with, we're influenced by them, right? And they're influenced by us. And I think we should be sensitive to that give and take, that what we do has an impact on those around us and what people around us has an impact on us. And so as we try to raise ourselves, what we're really doing is impacting others and enabling them to raise themselves, that we can be a standard and an example for others. And we should look at others around us as a standard as well, as people that we can be affected by and learn from. So if we see each other, if I see my friend as someone who is deserving of the kind of love that I have for myself, and vice versa, then we'll just continue to lift each other up.
I think that's so interesting. As you were speaking, it kind of clarified for me the difference between self-confidence and self-love. And I think they're related, but they're not the same thing. In a sense, it's like to love oneself is to see yourself with all of your flaws and strengths and accept some of your limitations. It doesn't mean you give yourself a pass, but it's to say, I love myself. I'm doing the best that I can do, and I like the person that I am, even with all of my shortcomings. And I think that the way that then translates into a person who is loving to their neighbor is that if you can be forgiving, if you can acknowledge your own shortcomings and still love yourself, then you can acknowledge other people's shortcomings.
Very good.
And still love them. Maybe that's kind of like the mechanism here.
Yeah. Yeah. In psychology, the concept of acceptance meaning, there are certain things that I cannot change. And it's not that you just give up, but that person recognizes how I can cope or thrive in a certain situation with the right skills and the right tools, knowing that I can't change this person or I can't change this dynamic. And so when you use that word acceptance, I think it's so, so important, because for ourselves, for some people, they look at themselves, and if they lack a certain thing, it either brings them down or they ignore it or something. But if they practice a certain kind of acceptance and recognize their strengths and their weaknesses, then they can be more comfortable with both those strengths and those weaknesses and go about them with a sense of self-confidence and humility, as opposed to denial or resentment or things like that. Acceptance, I'm so glad you used that word. Acceptance, so, so important.
Beautiful.
Shkoyach.
Everyone's waiting, wishing, praying for Mashiach. It will only happen when we all get along. Everyone's waiting for, wishing, praying for Mashiach. Let's love one another and break out in song, and break out in song.